because the past 2 weeks did not. Unfortunate. Hello? Hello? There we go. So last week we wrapped up and we set an idea of what way we wanted to go with the class. So tonight we're just going to keep it really grounded, and we're going to do an introduction to what's known as the divine counsel view. So, kind of something we talked about a little bit last week was covenant creation. So what divine counsel is also going to do, it's going to give you a framework for the Genesis narrative. So covenant creation also has a framework for the Genesis narrative, and what the narrative we're going to talk about is just going to completely dismantle their narrative. You can take that how you'd like, but just to keep it simple, they localize everything and nothing is global. Everything is local to the land that, Israel is even nowadays. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm probably going to ask throughout and at the end. So, with hindsight, we got a great starting place because for the past 3 weeks, we've been talking about gods of other nations. So we understand that there is a unity that every group in the Near East or, across civilization, across the world, all believe in a figurehead of gods. So they all believe in the same idea. They have a storm god, they have a rain god, they have a god of death, a god of light, a god of the sun, a god of the moon, a god of fertility, right? This is a theme we see throughout every single culture. But without any further introduction, let's get into it. Welcome, everyone. We often read the biblical text through a modern 21st century lens. We picture a universe that is mostly empty, with just God in heaven and humans on earth. But the biblical authors didn't see the world that way. Tonight, we're going to learn how to read the text through the eyes of an ancient Israelite. To them, the unseen realm was the heavily populated, structured, and engaged in cosmic rebellion that explains the chaos we see in our world today. You might ask, what is the divine counsel? Simply put, it is the heavenly host. Just as God created a family of humans to partner with him in ruling the physical earth, starting in Eden, he also created a spiritual family to partner with him in administering to the spiritual realm. This isn't about God lacking power, it's about his nature. God doesn't need a counsel, but he chooses to share his authority. He delights in sharing his governance with free will beings, both human and spiritual. Let's get into a little bit of the vocabulary of the unseen realm. Now, this is where the modern readers get tripped up. When we see the word gods, plural, in the Bible, we immediately think of polytheism, which is the belief in worshiping multiple gods. Keyword is worshiping those gods, not just acknowledging their existence. We think of multiple all-powerful creator gods, but in the ancient Near East, the word Elohim, which we translate to God in our Bible, doesn't mean uncreated, omnipotent creator. It simply designates an individual as being from the spiritual realm. The linguistic note is typically also found in a plural form. So in the Hebrew, you have some words that are naturally plural. Elohim is a naturally plural male noun. That gets, we can go 100 directions with that, but just so you guys know, sometimes it'll be translated in the plural, sometimes it won't. That's in the translator's discretion. So they're going to use the context of the entire passage and they're either going to translate it plurally for us or singular for us. It just depends on the whole context. Under this ancient definition, angels are Elohim, demons are Elohim, the spirits of the dead are Elohim, and Yahweh, God, is an Elohim. Why? Because by nature, they all belong to the spiritual world. It is a word about where you belong, not what your attributes are. But here's the critical distinction. Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. He is the uncreated, ultimate creator. The rest are lesser created beings by him. Right? We get into this, and this is a lot, so let's unpack it using some scripture. Right? We're going to reference first Psalm 82. In Psalm 82, we see a cosmic courtroom scene. Yahweh takes his seat in the assembly of the gods to judge them for ruling the nations unjustly. Why is that important, you might ask? Because it establishes a cosmic power contrast. Just as Yahweh demonstrated his supremacy over Pharaoh in Egypt, showing that a man who claimed to be God was actually a lesser, subordinate being, he does the exact same thing here to the spiritual rulers of the nations. He strips them of their immortality, declaring in verse 7, "You will die like mere mortals." And that was Psalm 82, verse 7. And if you look at verse 1 of Psalm 82, you'll see God is seated amongst the heavenly hosts.
I do have a question.
Yes.
How many have translations that say something different other than divine assembly? What do you have?
Verse 1.
Yes.
Divine counsel.
Divine counsel.
Divine counsel.
His own congregation.
Wow, like
See,
that.
translations really.
Yeah, translations, No, you're fine. That was a great question. And for you guys that may have not heard him on the live stream, Alan just brought up some of the distinctions that are made by different translations in reference to the group that Yahweh is sitting in front of. So whether that's a council, a session, any of these translation words they want to use. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. So let's talk about some of the ancient Near Eastern context. So to fully grasp this, we have to look at Israel's neighbors. If we look at the ancient Ugaritic text, the Canaanites who believed in the divine council, they worshiped the high god El, and get this, his 70 sons. So you'll notice when we talk a little bit later about Deuteronomy 32 and Genesis, we'll see that God divides the nations into 70 nations. So right here we have a parallel from a Canaanite mythology that El, the creator god of them, has 70 sons that are lesser beings. So it's the same idea, parallels we're seeing here. The biblical authors aren't just copying the Canaanites. They are subverting them. The biblical text uses the same ancient vocabulary to launch a theological strike against the surrounding nations. It proves that the so-called gods of the nations are actually just rebellious, created subordinates of Yahweh. They're also, just to get more into why we see these distinctions with the Canaanites, in the time of Moses, we did a lot of work in the Exodus and relating the events of Exodus against the mythology of Egypt and how kind of step by step God is tearing down the beliefs of the Egyptians in terms of who they worship and who the powerful deities are and what they're represented in the physical world by. So what you're going to find is there's strong evidence to support that before Abraham converted to worshiping Yahweh, Abraham was actually Canaanite. We've had that discussion before. I'm pointing to Alan for everybody else. But the logical thing we see where Abraham was and the practices he had to be a Canaanite through and through. And we actually, and when we look at the New Testament, you'll get the account of Stephen being martyred. And when Stephen is looking up into the sky, he actually references something called the Star of Rephaim, which they've traced back to Abraham. And it's a star that represents the god Moloch or Baal or Murdoch, any interchangeable term there for what the Canaanites would have considered the god Baal or the highest god, like we discussed last week in Canaanite mythology. So it's just interesting to see the course the Bible takes and how the other religions closer to it imitate our story. They imitate it and they change the functionality, right? So what we'll see in Canaanite mythology is that there is the good God who saves the Canaanites. What does that mean? He rebels against El. So we're talking about a God who rebels against the Creator, a God, and takes mankind and teaches mankind the secret things. That sounds a whole lot if you guys have read the book First Enoch. There's an account where 70 watchers fall and they start teaching mankind religion, war, witchcraft, anything despicable in the eyes of Yahweh, right? So it's not a crazy thought to think where they fell, Mount Hermon, right? We talked about that this morning. The transfiguration happened here. Mount Hermon was notorious in the ancient world all the way up to the time of Christ as being the physical location known as the gates of hell. That's what it was called. That's where we have all these demons or fallen angels coming out of the sky, landing, teaching mankind things. So to truly understand our religion in the big grand scheme of things, we have to understand what the authors of the book are attacking. You know, people want to drag Revelation, the book of Revelation, into today's age and say, you know, locust and Revelation are just helicopters, right? Because things represent things. I don't know why they can't do that with the first century or with pre-first century Canaanite mythology. It's the same idea. Like we read about clouds. Almost any time we read about some individual riding on clouds, it is a polemic against Canaanite mythology, because Baal was the cloud rider. So we're going to see these notes where there'll be little pieces of information here about this prophet, or this prophet does a certain action, or even like when we talked about Jonah. Jonah being spit out of a fish had huge implications for the individuals in Nineveh. That's exactly how a prophet would be sent to them from their gods. You know, God isn't stupid. He knows everything. He knows exactly how to get to people. He knows exactly what he needs to tear down their beliefs of the gods they believe in. It's a lot. But let's get back on track to Deuteronomy 32 and the cosmic fall. To understand the rest of the Bible, we have to look at the Tower of Babel through this lens. All right. Babel wasn't just about confusing languages. It was a cosmic divorce. Because humanity rebelled, God disinherited the nations, being 70, assigning them to be governed by lesser spiritual beings, the sons of God. But look at Deuteronomy 32, verse 9. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted inheritance. Yahweh gives up the 70 nations and immediately goes to Abraham to create a brand new nation for himself. From this moment on, the rest of the Bible is the story of Yahweh taking back the nations from the lesser Elohim, or the lesser spiritual deities, right? Lesser gods, right? This is, we talked a little bit about covenant creation. So what they have to do right here with this text, specifically the Tower of Babel, is they have to say it wasn't different languages. It was religious apostasy. right? So these people, when they were scattered, were localized. When it talks about their religious tongues and everything, they're saying they had a unified belief against God, a small group of people, right? Whereas, I think most people in here, the traditional view we were taught was this is where everybody's dispersed, and that's how we got the different ethnicities and the nations of the world, because Babel happened and then we were spread out upon the world. That's the linear tracking. I was always taught that story always made sense to me. They have a problem with that, though, because everything is covenantal to them, right? So the way we see this, or the way I see this, is right when that happens, that's when the story isn't about mankind at this point, right? Israel is God's nation. They're supposed to be saving the people. Until Jesus comes around, good luck. It's not for them. Jesus is going to come back and preach to them. We hear that in Hebrews. He does go to Sheol. Everybody does get a chance. God's not an evil guy. But until that point comes, until Christ comes back, it's not about the 70 nations. That's why we'll see in Luke, Jesus Christ makes 70 prophets to go preach back to the nations. He's completely reverting Genesis 10 when the nations were split. It's not a mistake that the text says they were given their inheritance, right? God gave them their full measure of what he owed them and then left to them to their own devices. That's a story we see over and over and over again. We see the culmination of that story in AD 70. We see God take the people of that time living in Jerusalem. He allows them to murder his perfect sinless son so he could bear our sin. And what does he do? He waits 40 years. I mean, these people thought they won. They were under siege for a long time before they finally fell to Rome. And not for a second do I think most of the men in there were worried until that last day. We read about their piety. In some ways, we can make this parallel to modern Zionist, futurists that want to usher in the new age. They're perfectly content with their city burning. We got to remember, these rabbis understood the Messiah was returning in AD 70. The Pharisee calendar is set for AD 68 to AD 72 is when they estimated. That's the Pharisees of Jesus' day, estimating the return of Messiah. So they understood he was coming back any moment. They just didn't realize who he was coming back to get. And I think that's the most beautiful part of the Bible, is God uses people's own ignorance as the very mechanism to discipline them. Just like Pharaoh. Pharaoh never learned, so he killed his son, right? In the eyes of Pharaoh, his chief god was blocked out for 3 days. We're not talking about a guy that hasn't seen anything and doesn't know any better. We're talking about a guy who just had his entire worldview shattered, and he still decides to resist God. That's intentional. It's not a mistake. The authors, they know what they're doing. Any questions so far? This was an intro, so I didn't want to get too deep because this is a deep topic. That's kind of what we got for today. I wanted to have time for questions because I knew there might be. Because this is heavy stuff. This is going to be a lot. And a common critique, like people tell me all the time that I can't be Christian because I hold this view, because they say I'm polytheistic. For one, AD 70, those guys ain't running around anymore. They were cast into Tartarus. So they're not even to be worried about. And number two, I don't worship any of them. We don't got to worship any of these beings. They exist. We worship God, and that's all there is to it. And if anybody tries to tell you anything different, they don't understand. They're just being critical.
You agree with the view that after Babel, God divided the line
Yes.
for their worship. So the ones we've been studying were the gods that assigned to them, or they created them or made them up?
Yeah, no, I think they were assigned those gods. And I can't tell you off the top of my head, but there is a passage in scripture where they're specifically those Elohim were who were governing the nations. They were meant to point the nations back to Yahweh. And they're chastised for not doing that, of course. You know. And then they're God even says, you know, I pity them, for they don't know any better. You know, I don't judge them the way I judge you, O Israel, for you have been given much. And within that framework, that's why I think Hebrews is such an important book with talking about Jesus going and preaching. Because if not, we'd have a big problem on our hands. A bunch of people existed that had no chance to get saved, right?
I've got another translation question.
Okay.
In Deuteronomy 32:8, how do y'all's translations render that? When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of men, he set boundaries of the people according to the number of what? Sons of Israel, anybody else? Sons of God, another huge.
That is a huge one.
That's a huge translation issue.
Because it should be sons of God.
There is no Israel.
Right.
And
so sons of God is a good one.
Yeah, CSB has sons of Israel as well, or people of Israel. Yeah. And the King James version is bad about that too, isn't it? It'll just translate Lord. Everything is Lord instead of God. Yeah. That's where we get the lordship idea for that word at, I'm pretty sure.
The Lord thing comes from the Greek.
From the New Testament, because that's how they translate it.
Well, the
in the Septuagint.
Yeah, they use kurios for tetragrammaton, if that's a thing.
Yeah.
If you done any deep diving on the Masoretic text, and if they corrupted it, and if Yahweh is it, I don't know. This is too big for me, but
the tetragrammaton
is kurios. Or Adonai. Is that Hebrew? Did they?
I think that's Hebrew.
Did they do it? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
I'm not great at that. Off top, I gotta come in with my pre-prepared with my linguistics. I'm trying to get a dictionary specifically for it, so I can just have it in front of me. That's the secret.
I've always been told that everything is counterfeit. They've been cheaping it to make it what they want. We do that today in our church. God's word makes it what we want it to be.
Yeah.
We're the ones that counterfeit God's word.
Yeah. I didn't want to keep class too heavy tonight just because I didn't know how many questions we would have. So that's kind of the extent of what I have to teach on. But if we want to go off the rails, we can do that for the next 20 minutes. So.
She said, "Come on, Elmer."
You mentioned at the beginning about how it says, "Don't worship others' gods."
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the first commandment.
When I was growing up, divine counsel was never spoken about at all. And it was hard for me when I understood that there was several, but he was the head. Because I had always been taught that what that scripture meant was don't worship idols.
False idols. Yeah.
Yes.
Or it could be your job, or
any idol is what takes place.
It's an anthropomorphic title. It's to delineate a non-existent thing.
And that's not what it means at all.
No.
I mean, why would he say don't worship any other gods but me, if there weren't other gods? And I never really put that together until all of a sudden.
That's what got me, actually. I had a friend, his name Kyle Nelson, my old plumbing manager. He just looked at me and was like, Cameron, the first commandment is to have no other gods, plural, over God. And you're telling me you don't believe in gods? I was like, that's what the Bible says. I guess I'm stuck. And then, yeah. And then I looked into who popularized this idea. His name is Michael Heiser. Is that how you say it? Yeah, Michael Heiser. And he has a lot of information on YouTube. He did a conference where it was called The Unseen Realm. That's a really good series. He kind of goes through his life's work there, explaining the divine counsel. That's where this, I don't want to say originates from, but he is where the idea in modern history has been popularized through.
It's always been there. We just didn't see it until you.
Exactly.
It's always been there, I just thought they wouldn't it?
Because unless you're an ivory tower scholar type, you're not going to know about ancient Near East stuff. Like you have done a good job
Yeah.
with our attention. We might hear about mythologies and how every culture has a pantheon of gods, but we would just write that off. Like they were just.
Yeah, and no, I mean it's even worse because we look at these pantheons and there's a common theme where the sons of the original gods or the sons of the most powerful god are always in rebellion against that god and always trying to they can never kill him, they can never take him out forever, but they're always trying to move the goalpost and just imprison and push him away from the people. So that to that extent it's interesting too. You know, we get into punishing. And then if you look at mythology pre and post Second Temple collapse, that's interesting. So what they believed in terms of polytheism before the Second Temple fell, and then what they believed after is radically different. So like I'm talking Babylonian versus Greek, or Egyptian versus Greek, and in some ways Roman, and we'll get into like Nordic. It's crazy. Even Norse mythology, Odin dies on a cross. That's pretty interesting, right? Because these are being written around the same time that Jesus is around. They're coming up with some of these myths about their original Nordic gods. Thor originally is the figurehead of Norse mythology, and then Odin comes in as his father later on in history, and we get what we have today in like the Marvel movies and stuff. But even just seeing the difference that takes place in a society that has seen Christ, and then they have a polytheistic religion is completely different prior to Christ. And I mean, we can see that Hinduism, any belief system. It fundamentally changes the relationship that the human being or individual has with their gods. That's how we get the hyper-personalized religion through like Buddhism and stuff like that. It looks like you had a question.
Yeah, something been hanging around my brain. So weeks back, you preached a message on how God has, I don't know the right word to use, sort of veiled or hidden the mystery of the gospel. You know, there's no clear story that says this is who he is, this is when he's going to come, he's going to be killed and raised. You know, you've got to put that together from the different books, different authors, different centuries. Okay. And then there was a day when maybe Jerry asked the question, or someone asked it. No, maybe someone in the choir asked the question about the verse he was preaching on. You mean they would not have crucified? No, they would not have crucified the Lord. So I've been pondering those things around home. And I wonder if, because of the fallen gods, the watchers, they're out there and they're in the world and they have a mission to try and thwart God's mission. That played a role in why he did what he did. you know,
Failing the,
veiling the message. I mean, it's one thing to not, I don't want to say hide, I'm trying to say the word hide, he didn't hide, but he cloaked it from the human readers. But I'm starting to wonder about that. Did that play a role in why he did it the way he did it with these, cryptic passages?
it's a great question.
And, apparent double fulfillments. And the Solomon and Jesus. All those kinds of things, something that even the fallen watchers might have been tricked by, not being a good.
Yeah, they didn't have the full story for sure, but I don't know, it's like Satan entered Judas to get it done. It's almost like he thought, okay, if we do this, you're done, and we have one.
In some
But then
aspects,
again,
yeah. Because I know, like, do you have an interesting, and I know we've talked about this before, but you come to an interesting crossroads here. Because before Christ goes up, he says something that's like totally against the biblical method. What, you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and go buy one. And then they come to him with two swords. Like they're ready to fight. We only need one sword. Because Jesus understood he was going to get arrested. So he knew he needed something there so that he could actually get arrested. That's why he wanted a sword. He wasn't trying to lead a revolt. Like I said, from the mind of, I believe, Judas Iscariot, in his brain, what he wanted was, all right, Christ, I've been with you 3 years. You tell me you're the Messiah. Let's see it. So he gives him over, force his hand, force him to bring the kingdom down now, because you're going to die if you don't. But that's the beauty of it, like we talked about. Everything God does, he does poetically so that people are punished by their own accord. So if Christ never dies, no resurrection. That's the beauty in it in some aspects. Yeah, no atonement. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And when he tells his disciples, the Son of Man has to be betrayed, crucified, and rise again on the third day, like the scriptures say. Where does it say that? Well, it's here a little bit, it's here a little bit, it's here a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're 100% on board. It's kind of like.
And then you get Peter denying that, even though earlier in the story we understand Peter has been given, in some retrospect, intimate knowledge of Christ. Because he's the first to recognize Christ as Messiah. And what does Jesus do? He looks at, blessed are you, Peter, for the Father has revealed this information to you. So even somebody like Peter, who's intimate with Jesus, who has knowledge from the Father, still doesn't get it. Right? To your point about the demonia not knowing, or the demons.
Oh, but it all comes into focus.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where, I didn't mention this, but the fallen watchers, they're Elohim, and we kind of define that word. But you'll see after the fall, which happens in early Genesis, and we even get a verse about that, there's a new word they're going to use for these fallen angels. It'll be Nephilim, or the offspring of them in humanity. It's a synonymous word, Nephilim. And we can treat the word Nephilim like discarded spiritual beings or evil spiritual beings. In the New Testament, we're speaking Greek, so Nephilim goes away. We get a new word called demonia, or just demons. It's just Greek. Some of the Greek words we translate really good, and you can still pronounce them.
Going back to the Elohim, and this is something that I didn't know until I first heard about all this. Like Elohim just being a placeholder, it's where you reside. Remember when Saul went to the witch of Endor and had her call up Samuel, they called him an Elohim.
Yeah.
And it's because he was from the spirit world. It was an Elohim.
Yeah. in some aspects, I think, when we first started this class, we kind of had a thing with conditionalism. But like when we look at the divine counsel framework, well, we understand that there is a intimate relationship with the spiritual world to God. He created things spiritual, and he created them spiritually everlasting. Kind of like Mike Sullivan says, this is my take on it, is I like conditionalism. It works. It doesn't make God evil, but I just don't see it in the scripture. There's not enough scriptural evidence for it for me. And just because there's so much counter evidence to the everlasting of the soul. But that kind of gets into this divine counsel framework. We're going to learn intimately about the spiritual world, and that's kind of the best part of this series, is we're going to learn lots about demons, lots about angels, lots about other religions, which we've kind of started already. Like I said, we got a great base work to go into this series, doing the past classes. All right. Anything else? Because it's 6:50, so it's about close enough that we can wrap up. If nobody else has any questions.